First, story, The Whispers of Camp Hollow. It was a chilly November night when our platoon arrived at Camp Hollow, a long-abandoned military training ground tucked deep in the woods of Oregon. The mission was simple: conduct a routine recon exercise and spend the night before heading back to base. But from the moment we set foot there, I knew something was wrong. The camp was eerily silent, its buildings crumbling under the weight of time. Rust streaked the walls, and vines crept through the cracks like nature was trying to erase its existence. But it was the air that unnerved me the most, thick and heavy. It carried an unnatural stillness that made every sound seem deafening. "Keep your eyes open, guys," Sergeant Collins muttered, his voice lower than usual. "This place gives me the creeps." I could see it on his face too. The man who never flinched in combat was uneasy. We split into pairs to search the grounds. I was partnered with Private Harris, a rookie with a nervous energy that only made me more on edge. As we swept through an old barracks building, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. "Did you hear that?" Harris whispered as his flashlight darted wildly around the room. I paused, listening intently. There it was again, low, rasping sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Probably the wind, I said, more to convince myself than him. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the wind. The sound grew louder as we moved deeper into the building. Then we saw it. In the corner of the room stood a figure, its back turned to us. At first, thought it was a man, but something was off. Its limbs were too long, its posture unnatural, like it had been twisted into a mockery of human form. "Hey, identify yourself," I called out, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. The figure didn't move or respond. Harris took a step forward. And that's when it turned around. Its face was a horrific void. A swirling mass of darkness that seemed to pull the light from the room. A low, guttural growl emanated from it, and before I could react, it lunged. We scrambled back, our shouts echoing through the empty camp. The thing moved with impossible speed, its jagged limbs scraping against the walls as it chased us. I don't know how we made it out of the building, but when we did, the others were already gathered outside, their faces pale with fear. "It got Collins," one of them whispered, his voice shaking. "It just dragged him into the woods." I looked around and realized the sergeant was nowhere to be seen. We didn't wait to find out what it was or where it had gone. We abandoned the camp and ran through the forest until we reached the convoy. To this day, none of us speak of what happened at Camp Hollow, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear those whispers calling my name. Second story, The Beast of Fort Crowley. It was a quiet night at Fort Crowley, a small abandoned military base in the forests of Montana. I had been sent there with my unit for a routine training exercise. The place had been shut down decades ago, and the buildings were in various stages of decay. The rumors about the base were plenty and strange, but none of us paid them any mind. The first few hours went by without incident. We split into teams to explore the old barracks and report back. My partner was Corporal James Holloway, a man who seemed to find humor in everything, even in a place as eerie as this. This is just a ghost story playground, right? He joked. But there was a tension in his voice that betrayed his words. As we moved deeper into the base, the air grew colder and heavier. The only sounds were the occasional creak of rotting wood and the echo of our own footsteps. It was when we reached the armory that things took a turn for the worse. Inside the armory was a metal door marked with faded yellow letters, restricted access. Naturally, James wanted to open it. Against my better judgment, I helped him pry it open. Behind the door was a stairwell leading down into the darkness. "This is where the treasure is kept," James said with a nervous chuckle. The stairs led us into a vast underground room lined with rows of empty metal cages. The air was thick with the smell of rust and something else I couldn't quite place. James shined his flashlight on the far end of the room where a pile of bones lay scattered across the floor. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. My voice sounded small in the vastness of the room. James moved closer to the bones, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. That was when we heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed from somewhere in the darkness. We froze, our flashlights darting around the room. The growl came again. Closer this time. I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye and turned just in time to see a shadow too large to be human skitter across the ceiling. "Run!" I yelled. But James was already frozen in place. His flashlight pointed at the ceiling. The thing dropped down with a wet thud behind him. Its shape was indistinct, but its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the darkness. Before I could react, it lunged at James. I ran as fast as I could. The sounds of James's laugh, screams echoing in the corridors behind me. When I finally burst out into the night air, I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The rest of my unit found me an hour later, but there was no sign of James or the creature. To this day, I don't know what we unleashed in that armory, but I know I will never set foot near Fort Crowley again. Whatever was down there, it was never meant to be found. Third story, The Beast of Fort Pine. It was a stormy spring night when I arrived at Fort Pine, a remote military base hidden deep in the woods of Montana. The air was thick with mist, and the sound of howling wind echoed through the forest. I had been assigned to this base for a routine security detail after a series of strange reports had surfaced. The officers briefed us with cold expressions, avoiding details as if they feared mentioning something unspeakable. Our orders were simple: patrol the perimeter, report any unusual activity, and never go beyond the tree line after dark. They repeated that last part with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. By midnight, I was stationed in a watchtower overlooking the base's dense forest border. The radio crackled with occasional check-ins from other guards, but otherwise, the night was eerily silent. Then saw it. At first, it was just a shadow moving between the trees, too large to be any animal I knew. Its movements were unnaturally smooth, almost as if it was floating. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the area where it disappeared, only to see two glowing yellow eyes staring back at me from the darkness. Base to Tower 5. Report your status? The radio buzzed, startling me. I pressed the button with shaking hands. Tower 5 here. There is something in the forest. Request immediate backup. Before I could finish, the radio went dead, leaving me with only the sound of my own breathing and the distant rustle of leaves. The glowing eyes were gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. Moments later, I heard a scream from the far end of the base, followed by gunfire. I grabbed my rifle and descended the tower, the noise with my heart pounding. When I arrived, the scene was a nightmare. Count 3 of my fellow guards were lying motionless on the ground, their bodies covered in deep gashes. Standing over them was the creature, a towering beast with matted black fur, razor-sharp claws, and a twisted humanoid face. It turned its head toward me, its eyes glowing with a predatory intelligence. I froze as it let out a low, guttural growl. Before I could react, it lunged at me with impossible speed. I fired my weapon, but the bullets barely slowed it down. Just as it was about to strike, a blinding light engulfed the area. When I regained consciousness, I was in the base's infirmary. The commander stood at my bedside, his face grim. "You survived the encounter, but no one else did," he said. "We don't know what that thing is, but it's not the first time it has appeared." I was discharged from service shortly after with strict orders never to speak of what happened at Fort Pine. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I can still hear its growl in the back of my mind, reminding me that it's still out there, waiting in the darkness.